and good morning. We are talking about something that's major in the news that just broke on Friday, which is Tulsi Gabbard is now resigning from her position as well. It takes effect, I believe, June 30th of this year. And we're just going to jump into that, some of the implications and some things that may follow, who possibly might be picked next. So let's just go ahead or who may have a choice or a say in who gets picked next. I know it's way too soon to start throwing around names, but we can kind of speculate on who is going to be in the room on making those decisions. So, Senator, just want to say hello and let's get to it.
Well, hello, Morgan. Yes, it's kind of a sad day for America because Tulsi Gabbard was one of the most honorable individuals in American politics. Very bright, very stand up for what was right. She has been opposed to wars of aggression, and she has been sort of an honest broker representing the interests of the United States, as opposed to the interests of foreign nations, whether it be, Great Britain or whether it be Israel. She's the top official in all of the huge, unwieldy bureaucracy that we have for intelligence. That includes the Central Intelligence Agency, the FBI works on this, many different organizations, Defense Intelligence Agency. And I met with Tulsi Gabbard once when she was in Congress, and at the time we were both very interested in what was going on in Syria, which has always been grotesquely misrepresented by the mainstream media. The war in Syria was a proxy war in which Israel, the United States, Great Britain, a number of other players in the Middle East came together, and they brought up and developed a huge terrorist network that was under the organization of Mohammed al-Jalani, who is now the president of Syria. He changed his name, slicked over his hair, shaved off his beard, and declared he's a moderate. The fact is, he's one of the most deadly, hideous terrorists in modern history. And in any event, he led the group that was responsible for thousands and thousands of beheadings of innocent Syrians and of Syrian soldiers who were captured prisoners of war. His men practiced a very primitive form of Islam that allowed them to seize as property any females that they captured in battle. And I recall there was one of these Al Qaeda people who owned a young girl. I don't know whether she may have been 11, 12 years old. And when he would go into battle against the Syrian army, he would strip her naked and tie her across the windshield, sort of, at the base of the windshield, so that as he drove his vehicle into the Syrian lines, the Syrians would hesitate to shoot because the Syrian army they were a group of very professional, very courageous men, very well led by people who came from a very moral culture, and so the Tulsi Gabbard understood what happened in Saudi or in Syria.
Yeah.
Uh, she was the first member of Congress ever to travel to Syria during the war. I was the first American official as a Virginia state senator,
Mhm.
and I met twice with President Assad. I met uh, twice with President Aoun, who was the Christian president of Lebanon. And I met with a great number of officials, religious leaders, everyone. And I went on the front lines when the Syrian army was confronting and ultimately victorious over an enormous army of ISIS that had been armed and promoted by the United States, among other people, hoping to overthrow the duly elected government, the constitutionally elected government of President Bashar al-Assad, who is always referred to as a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
We don't refer to Zelensky as a dictator, and he is not an elected official. He's a guy who finished his term of office and said, well,
yeah, no elections.
This democracy stuff is not for me. President Assad, during the war, at enormous expense and effort, held very legitimate elections and was elected overwhelmingly. And so, in any event, Tulsi Gabbard understood the history of what was going on in the Middle East, and she represented America, and she believed that Director of National Intelligence should report the foreign intelligence, the national intelligence, truthfully. And she did not accept this notion that somehow the job of the Central Intelligence Agency and all these other agencies is to deceive the American people and to keep them blinded to the aggression and so forth that was going on.
Yeah, a lot of people were very hopeful when the Trump administration notified the public that they were signing on Tulsi Gabbard as DNI, primarily from her speaking out against, Operation Timber Sycamore, understanding clearly what happened, how the American government was engaging in nefarious actions, so much so that, the enemies that we claimed to fight, we were funding and providing them weapons to commit the terror attacks that we have sent a lot of young men and women to die for, to stop. She was very knowledgeable on that, and she even spoke about that during her confirmation hearing, which was very powerful in basically speaking truth to these halls that continue to push for foreign wars. Now, this resignation, she's stating, comes from her husband getting terminal bone cancer. She will complete her term until June 30th, giving Trump essentially a little over a month to refill the position. What are your thoughts on who may be filling this position? This comes at a time where we're still kind of in this stalemate with Iran. We don't really have a ceasefire agreement. No, it's not really tied up. It's loose ends on how that's going to be completed. So this Director of National Intelligence that will come in will have to deal with all of that. You had, we spoke about this backstage. This comes after Joe Kent's resignation, Joe Kent was the second hand to Tulsi Gabbard in the counterterrorism sector of the CIA. He resigned from his protest of the Iran war. I know some of us speculated that we thought Tulsi was going to do that in follow suit with Joe Kent out of disgust of the Iran war as well. So what are your kind of thoughts on where does this lead the American government as we're still kind of engaging in these war actions that we were?
Yeah, well, I would just let me just touch on Joe Kent a moment. Joe Kent is very much out of the same mold as Tulsi Gabbard, a man of distinction, of honor, a man who represents the American people, as opposed to some of these more sinister foreign actors on the world scene, people like Netanyahu, who many people believe to be one of the great war criminals of our time. I think it was a tremendous loss to the United States when he left, and I think it suggested a purge was underway. And the problem was, it has always been awkward for this administration when the truth was expressed about foreign policy. And it was always done very, very, discreetly and so forth. But unfortunately, the president, for whatever reason, has come so much under the domination of Benjamin Netanyahu and the Zionist funders of his power base, that I think they won out against the American people, and so we no longer have that truthful voice. Joe Kent had when he resigned, he said that it was clearly because of the Iran war. He didn't say that he was resigning because of the Iran war, but it was clear that was the reason. And he had said that based on the national intelligence that is available, that there was no imminent threat that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon. This is consistent with what has been said by intelligence agencies going back for 20 years. Mm-hmm. And always you have the voice of Benjamin Netanyahu saying they're going to have an atomic bomb within a week, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And here it is 20 years and it's still, in a few weeks they're going to have it. Rubbish. It's always, for Israel, it's always been a pretext to draw the United States into war. Netanyahu still has not gotten what he really wants, which is American boots on the ground, American Marines and soldiers slogging through the fields, getting their legs and arms blown off for the glory of greater Israel. And so I think it's unfortunate we see this purge taking place, because it does suggest that clearly Israel dominates American foreign policy. Mm-hmm. Benjamin Netanyahu today is the most powerful figure in foreign policy of any leader of any nation, including the President of the United States. And it's unfortunate. I'm sad to see it, because I admire a great many things that President Trump is doing, and I don't know why. I mean, he's a bright individual. He tried very hard, I think. President Trump tried very hard to do the right thing in Syria during his first administration. He actually attempted to withdraw U.S. forces from Syria 3 different times. And he did the very best that he could.
Yeah, no, this comes on the heels of the Kentucky primary. We were speaking about this last week, where you had these pro-Israeli billionaires, pro-Israeli PACs, AIPAC, I believe other PACs as well, injected $30 million into this one district, and they won. Ed Galrain is now won the primary in a district that will basically is a shoo-in. You know, a lot of these districts that are set in stone, whether they're democratically led or Republican led, if you win the primary, it's essentially a green ticket towards the general election, and you have that seat. So Thomas Massie was kicked out. So this goes to your point where there is this heavy influence of pro-Israeli propaganda. You have to be essentially Israel first if you want to have a modicum of power in these halls. I was speaking with a brilliant woman, Mel Whitty. She does a lot on campaign finance fraud, but she was speaking about the dichotomy of Trump went after Brian Kemp in Georgia, and Brian Kemp wasn't against Israel. So he won his reelection, you know, and with great margins. But you have Thomas Massie, who went against Israel, and Trump decided to go against him as well and lost. So it's kind of showing this immense weight that if you're not pro-Israel, if you go against the Israeli cause with these billionaires, it signs your ticket for you to leave office or leave any kind of sign of power. So I think that's a very interesting aspect as well. I know Tulsi Gabbard in her presidential run was speaking out against Israel and what they were doing in the West Bank. And of course, she didn't get too far in the primaries. But to have that kind of voice in there that has this objective look at what's going on in the Middle East was very important. Me personally, I wish that she had taken more of a vocal role like Joe Kent did, but I understand that sometimes in these political games, to kind of have a seat at the table and be the voice of reason, you know, you have to save face. So it is kind of it's sad that to see her go. I know that this is for her, what she's saying, for family reasons, but I do worry about who is going to fill in this void at this given time. Yeah.
Now, as far as I know, there's not a designated hitter, but you can pretty well predict that whoever it is going to be vetted by and thoroughly satisfactory to Benjamin Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. So we find ourselves in this odd posture where we have foreign officials who are weighing in and perhaps in the dominant decision-making role in determining what intelligence the American people will be allowed to hear. We know there are voices within the intelligence agencies that were very opposed to what we were doing in Iran, and that they did not agree with this oft-stated notion that, you know, Iran was trying to get a nuclear weapon and they'd have had it overnight and all of this business. And it's nonsense.
Well, yeah, I mean, we remember Operation Midnight Hammer was supposed to have completely obliterated these facilities. And then they come back to Americans and they say, well, we did, but we didn't. But that's why we have to go back in there. But we totally did. It's very strange, the mental gymnastics you have to go through to, I guess, be approving of these actions and take what the government's giving you at face value, given the fact that we're told that Operation Midnight Hammer was supposed to have solved that issue. That always kind of leaves people's minds as well when you have that conversation. It's like that's that other element where we're told that this operation was a complete success and it had annihilated these facilities for this specific purpose. And then I guess they still have some capacity to have almost built this nuclear weapon that they've been almost building for the past 20 years. So,
yeah, I mean, ironically, it is very possible that Iran will now build a nuclear weapon because we attacked them. when all is said and done, it's a huge country. It's about the size of Western Europe, and it shouldn't be terribly hard to conceal a nuclear weapons program somewhere in all of the deserts and the mountains and so forth. And the person who blocked the idea of having an Iranian nuclear power was the Ayatollah Khamenei, who really was a relatively moderate leader. I know you're not allowed to say that, but the fact is that he issued a fatwa, which is like a Supreme Court edict. It's the highest legal and religious declaration in the country. And that declaration, it was extremely explicit that there would be no nuclear weapon produced by Iran, that it was morally offensive, the idea of having one. And that held from, I think it was about 2003. It was 4 years after the Ayatollah took power from the original Ayatollah Khomeini, who was a very bloodthirsty, brutal revolutionary who killed off many of the moderates in Iran. So when he finished his term, then Ayatollah Khamenei took over, and he sort of consolidated his authority. And after about 4 years, he issued the fatwa against nuclear weapons. So he was the guy who was responsible for preventing Iran from having nuclear weapons, and we killed him, ostensibly because we thought that they were going to create a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's such bizarre nonsense, the whole thing. But that's where we are with it.
Yes, it's truly concerning, and who they decide to fill the DNI will have immense power, and it will be certainly something to watch and keep our eye on. Who is the prospects? Who they claim to, because they will show what angle they want to go. We kind of had this suspicion when Tulsi Gabbard was going in that it actually was really going to be this America first. We're going to be the peace candidate. We're not going to get in these new engagements. Tulsi Gabbard's stance has been proudly for all that. And, we know that only one person can do so much in these roles. But if they choose to have someone like a John Bolton or something of those lines, where they're the ones that are very happy to go into war, that'll be a very clear indicator of where we're going to be headed the next 3 years with this administration, I think.
It's not hard to find people who, at the drop of a hat, if you say, well, let's go to war against Greenland, or let's go, against Denmark, or let's overthrow the government of Cuba. Let's take down Iran. Let's disintegrate Russia. Let's take on China. There are plenty of takers, and at some point we're going to the whole thing's going to blow up in our faces. Well,
now, we want to pivot to more of an immigration thing, but I don't know if you had seen this, but it's a lot of the information that's coming out of what Israel has just done it was over 100 activists, doctors, lawyers who join on to these flotillas that try to get aid into Gaza. This was one of the first times that Israel has conducted a seize of these individuals in international waters closer to Cyprus than Gaza. And there are reports of them being beaten, sexually assaulted. Ben Gvir has been blasted by, I believe, government members in Spain and Italy for the way that their citizens were treated. He went there and he did this basic humiliation campaign where he posts the videos laughing at them all with their heads to the ground. Didn't know if you had a chance to see that or not. They're all coming back with bruises, and there's some accounts of them being funneled into, once they were abducted in international waters, into one container where they were all Israeli IDF official members took turns beating on them in these one containment containers, and they have all the bruises, and the they were shot with rubber bullets. Didn't know if you had a chance to see that, but I think that is very important, because it's not being spoken about in the American media.
Mm-hmm.
You do have Americans who were present on the boat and were abducted, and were also beaten as well. And
I'm not up on that. I just say that, many years ago you'd have been skeptical of reports of this nature, but it has become the practice of the Israeli armed forces and sort of the whole foreign policy establishment there to just act with utter brutality. I mean, these are the modern brown shirts of the Middle East, and I noticed, by the way, we've talked about the crimes against Christianity by the Israeli Defense Forces in the ones invading Lebanon, and where they smashed the face of Jesus on a large crucifix. They mocked the Virgin Mary by having a lit cigarette hanging out of her mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And so they made a big to-do. They said, well, look, we're going to punish, and there were the guys involved, some of them got 2 weeks, some of them got 3 weeks jail time. Whether they serve it, we don't know. But interestingly, there was a member of the IDF who put on his shoulder a little emblem that said Emmanuel, which is the term for Jesus. And he was severely punished. He ended up 30 days in jail for having a neat, orderly little patch that said Emmanuel. And it shows sort of the contrast is men who are doing something that is so violently offensive that it spurs the Vatican and foreign nations into action about Israel. They get 2-3 weeks, but a guy who acknowledges the kingship of Jesus Christ, he gets 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
See where their values. I mean, there is this hatred that a large element within Israel, just a hatred of Arabs, hatred of Christians, and it's very concealed in this country, but it's something that's quite apparent over there. So let's see. If we could just touch for a minute on what's going on with immigration.
Yes. Let's go ahead and pivot. You had spoken to me about this influx of immigration judges. There is around, prior to Trump coming into office, there was around 700. There was supposedly this purge that had happened throughout this past year, where over, I believe, 100 judges were taken off, and then we've injected another 100 back onto the force. So I'm just going to kick it off to you, and you kind of give more into this story.
Yeah, what was going on with the immigration judges operate under the Department of Justice,
mm-hmm.
And so these are Article 2 judges. They come under the executive branch of government rather than the judiciary. And they administer the immigration laws. And the problem that Trump saw when he came into office was that you had a number of these judges who had built up over years, who had come out. They would be advocates for the illegal immigrants who were coming across the border, and they'd come up with all kinds of hokey excuses, and they would allow them to get into the United States. And then the next thing, they'd be appointed as judges. Well, you obviously didn't have anybody representing the American people in that deal. You just had judges who were more beholden, perhaps, to the cartels than or other interests than they were to the rule of law. And so that's where you saw a lot of these people being fired. Now, what they did is they reached into the ranks of the Judge Advocate General Corps and of the military services. I was a member of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the JAGs, and very, very fine attorneys. And a number of those, that's probably the largest single group of people who have become these new judges. And in any event, they had the largest ever class of new immigration judges, and their task is to speed up the enormous, just disgraceful backlog of deportation cases. These cases have been languishing for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. And they had built up a backlog of 4 million cases. And the Trump administration, for the first time in my memory, has actually reduced the backlog. And it may not sound like a lot, but they've reduced it from 4 million cases to 3.5 million. Mm-hmm. That's, getting, they're having to keep up with the incoming cases and at the same time clear out the backlog. Getting rid of 500,000 cases is a huge accomplishment.
Yes, with the 700 judges, that is a lot of cases. What are your thoughts on how this is being handled so far?
I think it's being done very well. We had sort of developed this sort of this culture of ignoring the law and saying, well, wink and a nod, we'll just ignore what the immigration law says. And this is why the Biden administration opened the borders and encouraged a flood of illegal immigrants. And it's not what the American people wanted. It's not what they voted for. And so I think it's an encouraging thing. Now, one other thing that's happened recently in the immigration area is that there has been a decision made that no one can apply for a green card unless they're present in their country of origin. So if you are a Greek person who is wanting to get a green card, you have to apply for a green card from Greece and be granted permission to come over. But that's the way it was supposed to work, but we sort of developed this idea, well, if you come over here on a student visa and you kind of decide you want to stay here, you put in for a green card, you work some of these slick little deals, and the next thing you're here forever. Now, I ran into this once. I had a relative from the Isle of Man, which is part of the British Empire, and he wanted to come over here. He was a pilot, and he had a fellow who was going to employ him. And so he asked me to help out, so I coordinated a little bit. And in the course of it, I found out that the way that companies bring people in here illegally is that what they'll do, and I don't know whether it wasn't strictly illegal, but it was certainly circumventing the law. There was a requirement to demonstrate a need in this country for a certain type of employment that could not be satisfied by an American worker. Mm-hmm. So the answer that I was hearing is, well, this is easy. What you do is here you're talking about a pilot for a small air freight system, and what we do is we just we advertise in something that airline pilots would never read. You'd publish it in the some IT publication. Well, here's a job offer for a pilot flying whatever, and you just run it for the period of time. Then you make out an affidavit. You say, oh, there was no American interested in the job, and you get the green card. And this was a pilot, but the same thing goes with any kind of job. So the idea is that we're going to make these folks apply from their country instead of, we're trying to, or the Trump administration is trying to take apart the different facets of the mechanisms for skirting and avoiding compliance with American law. So I think that's a very positive thing. We, as a nation, we should decide whether we want some group of people or another group of people to come in. That's a political decision. And it's always been sort of a big scam on the American people that we bring people in. We very often put people out of work in the process. And so regardless of what anyone thinks about the immigration law, there's no doubt that one of the great achievements of this administration is that they carried out what they promised people they would do, which was to get control of our borders.
Now, what kind of reform would you call for or be open for? You touched on the HB1 and the HB2 visas, which is the skilled and non-skilled workers. A lot of employers take advantage of those. That's mainly like in farms. So you mentioned pilots. I know the HB1 visa, which is the skilled worker, a lot of it, there are people who speak out about how it robs upcoming doctors of their residency, to the tune of hundreds of doctors go without residency when it's given to another doctor from either India, which is like the predominantly country that they come from. But according, some people think, okay, well, maybe that person tested higher. It's done on a lottery system, which was brought to my attention. But we have this whole sector of the population that resides in America who have been here for 20 years or 20 plus years, and they don't have citizenship. They came here during some kind of boom of immigration, and they're just,
right.
They have a small job that they work, and they have children now. They've significantly embedded themselves into American life. What is some kind of reform of a pathway so they can get citizenship? Or I know these people that this has happened to, or they have been here for a very long time. They have, their law abiding in their day to day. If they get deported, they can't come back into the country for 10 years. So that often results in the entire family having to get up and move back to, or, the kids who have never been there, go to this country. So what are kind of your thoughts on that? That is kind of something, this rift that happens between the left and the right, or when we kind of have this discussion of immigration.
Yeah, it's, this is the problem with dealing with immigration with a wink and a nod at the borders, or whether it's at the airports, the borders, however people are coming in. We take the idea, well, we don't really care that much. They'll get in here and then we can never get rid of them. And that's the problem, is that at a certain point, people do, the people who come here don't necessarily come here because they're wanting to do something bad. They're coming here because they want a job. They want all of the things Americans want. And the problem is that in some cases, Americans don't get what they want because other people are coming and taking it. So it is a problem, and it's a political problem that will be struggled over, I think. And whatever we do, I think we need to act within the bounds of law. And I honestly, I wish that Congress would vote on various pieces of legislation and not, we do these gigantic bills that, are thousands of pages long. Let's just deal with some issues and start taking care of the people. I don't know of any state in the union where government is carried out by 1,000-page bills that nobody has read. Mm-hmm. And you've got secret committees that put all these things in. The U.S. Congress is not functioning in a very normal fashion, because it's just the committees don't do what they're supposed to. The whole thing just is a little unglued. But I think that we probably need to give some thought to how we deal with people. I don't have the answer. I think it in a sense, you almost have to first get a grip on what you're doing, so that you don't have all these gaping holes in the system. You need to kind of restore order to the system, and then you can decide who you want in, how you want them. And some of them, I think they could be some of the people who have demonstrated that, by, excellent records of conduct and abiding by the law and so forth. Mm-hmm. and being self-supporting. I don't think that the United States should be keeping anyone in this country who cannot support themselves long term. It's one thing, if you lose a job, it takes time to get a job. I get that. But if you are like certain communities, you up in Minneapolis, you have basically, a huge community of migrants from Somalia that are just living on welfare and voter and fraud. Mm-hmm. And we cannot afford that. That's a tremendous detriment to us. And I don't think we need criminals. I don't care if they managed to evade the law for 20, 30, 40 years.
Mhm.
If they are criminals, if we've got rapists and murderers and child molesters and people like that, we don't need them. They don't have a right to be here, and we need to get rid of them. But I know there are lots of people who came here, hoping to do well, and they've been good citizens. I think I may have mentioned I was the best man at a wedding for somebody who was an illegal immigrant. He was a very hard worker, and so I stood there at his wedding, and so it's not that I don't have sympathy towards the migrants who are here, but I think the first thing we've got to do is we've got to restore some semblance of order to our migration system.
Yeah. I like having these dialogues. I think it's very important because you have this issue that people get very volatile with, and I do think that there is some common ground, and like you said, you have this sympathy for these people who are basically, they are also, I guess, the same system that's failing Americans has also failed them in the essence of not giving them an adequate pathway of citizenship, given that they've been here for this long. We know that primarily how American citizenship has been working. You even said there's a backlog of 4 million cases that need to be heard. A lot of it's done on money. If you have the money, you can get to the front of the list, and then you can get the citizenship. But we need skilled workers. We do need the builders and the people who who don't do who are not the wealthy kind of business crypto people. And so that's I enjoy kind of having some back and forth dialogues on what is some sound policy that kind of can come out of this, where we don't neglect people who have fallen into the system, just like Americans have been failed by the system as well. So I think that that's very important. And I know that we're about to wrap up the show. I want to give you the last little bit to give your closing remarks, and then we can close out the show.
Yes, I'll just mention one last topic. We have a case out of Los Angeles where they have convicted some women who were involved in paying homeless people to register to vote in order to, fraudulently, get people who were really not supposed to vote. They're basically bribing people to vote. And they did plead guilty to election fraud. They were convicted. I don't know what the sentence was, but I mention it just because you will often read articles that say so-and-so claimed that this election was fraudulent, and they'll always insert the words, they'll cut and paste, without evidence. And we have a storied history of voter fraud in this country. It's not like this is some brand new thing that Trump concocted out of his fertile mind when he lost an election. We have had many fraudulent elections, and so it's just good to occasionally look at these fraudulent actions and recognize that, the fraud is there. And the media likes to think, well, okay, the allegations of fraud were put before a court and the court dismissed the case. Well, generally speaking, courts are not going to address these issues unless you can prove that the outcome of the election would be changed. And anyways, just it's extremely difficult to get standing to assert the action. There are all sorts of legal barriers to addressing the issue of voter fraud. And so it's just important to remind people that when you see these claims that without evidence, said this or that without evidence, usually those two words suggest that the article being written is not objective.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's
because typically, if you and I disagree on something and somebody wrote about it, they would say, that Morgan Blythe said this and Black said that, and you go and you sort of weigh the pros and cons of what was said. And but that's not the way the media does it. They just present the one side and then they say, that what President Trump said about elections was without evidence. Well, the evidence of fraud in his second election involved way over 1,000 sworn affidavits. There was photographic, there was video evidence, there was scientific evidence, there was documentary evidence. Mm-hmm. It didn't mean that it got presented in court or that it was heard by honest judges or whatever. So the idea of just dismissing all of this is, I think it's very poor journalism. I get nervous when I see any language in an article in the Washington Times or Washington Post, the New York Times, whatever it is, that says without evidence. Just tell me what the side said. What did they say? Don't say there's no evidence. Tell me what evidence they presented.
Yeah. I agree that is another sector of our American life that also needs heavy reform. It is electoral politics. A friend of the show, Diane Sayer, she has evidence of this happening to her as well. Counties that she knows that she got more than 2 votes gave her 0 votes. And she had watched it happen live. She had screenshots of it. So it's not something to scoff at. And I think it is very important, we give, and regardless of the administration was always saying that Venezuelans' elections were illegitimate, even though there's 3 forms of identification you have to have. You get your thumb inked so you can't vote twice. And it's on paper ballots. There is no machine that counts it. There is no a foreign company that has the complete authority of knowing who you voted for, which that is preposterous on its own. So I think I'll leave that since we can talk about all that at length, especially given what happened to Thomas Massey. I'm seriously want election reform.
Terrible what happened to him. He was a very fine congressman. And,
he's principled, you knew what you were going to get with him, and he said what he was going to do, and he did not waver. And I think that is very, very refreshing and rare than from what we've seen from our political officials that are up there right now. So
that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll just keep doing what we can do, and
yes, we will.
Try to have some influence over this.
Certainly. Well, I'll go ahead and encourage everybody to tune in next week to focus on the news. Thank you so much, Senator, for your input and your insight on all of this. And look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, Morgan.